Greetings and good morning to all of you. Ambassador P.S. Raghavan, former ambassador to Russia and Chairman National Security Advisory Board, New Delhi. Mr. Oleg N. Avdeep, Consul General of Russia, Chennai. Professor K. Raja Reddy, Vice Chancellor, Sri Venkateswara University, Tirupati. Professor Michimi, Gakushin University, Japan. Dr. Moises D'Souza from UK. Dr. Satoru Nagao from Japan. Dr. Gregory Cottage from Taiwan. Dr. Ruslan Mukhmetov, Russia. Dr. Amitabh Singh and Dr. Himani Pant, New Delhi. Professor A. Lakshman Chetty and Professor Y. Yakup, former directors of our center. Professor Uttam Kumar from Chennai Madras University, and learned colleagues and participants. On behalf of the Center for Southeast Asian and Pacific Studies and International Society for Asia Pacific Studies, Sri Venkateswara University, Tirupati, I extend warm welcome to all the dignitaries, speakers, and participants to the one-day online international conference. As a customary, just for the beginning, let me have some brief introduction about the theme of the conference. Briefly about the conference, there is a wide range of discourse taking place about the ongoing Russian war on Ukraine. In fact, scholars, particularly from Russia, drawing lines between the phrases or words like invasion, war, conflict, crisis, and so on. The very purpose of this conference has been to provide a clarity over such contradictions. Thanks to the speakers from different parts of the world, ready to share their personal, scholarly, and national perceptions during their presentations. Moreover, we have Russian diplomats and scholars to give a rationale behind a military attack on Ukraine. As a matter of introducing the theme of the conference, I would like to throw a light on the background, economic implications, and global concern of the ongoing war on Ukraine very briefly. There's a small background when you go into the background of this entire conflict or war. Since the beginning of 21st century, the political heat in Eastern Europe has been escalating, especially between the expansionist activities of Russia and NATO. The former republics of USSR such as Latvia, Estonia, Lithuania have successfully joined in NATO in 2004. Since then, there was much political pressure on Ukraine to take a stand between Russia and NATO. In this process, the president of former president of Ukraine, Mr. Viktor, has rejected a proposal of working with the EU in 2013. For the same reason, he was dethroned and fled the country. On the other flip, there was also certain attempts by Ukraine to join the NATO, but majority of Ukrainians were not in support of such a decision, even in 2008. But for the first time, there was a overwhelming public support to join NATO in 2014 after Russia's annexation of Crimea. Russia then formally annexed the peninsula after Crimeans voted to join the Russian Federation in a disputed local referendum. Ukrainians established anti-Russian sentiments due to Russia's aggression and military action on Ukraine. The Minsk agreements were a series of international agreements which sought to end the war in the Donbas region of Ukraine. The first, known as the Minsk Protocol, was drafted in 2014 by Trilateral Contact Group on Ukraine, consisting of Ukraine, Russia, and the Organization for Society and Cooperation in Europe. The agreement failed to stop fighting and thus followed with a revised and updated agreement, Minsk II, which was signed on 12th February 2015. This agreement consists of a package of measures, including a ceasefire, withdrawal of heavy weapons from the front line, release of prisoners of war, constitutional reform in Ukraine, granting self-government to certain areas of Donbass, and restoring control over the state border to the Ukrainian government. However, efforts to reach a diplomatic settlement and satisfactory resolution were largely unsuccessful. As a result, in April 2016, NATO announced that the alliance would deploy 4 battalions to Eastern Europe, rotating troops through Estonia, Latvia, Lithuania, and Poland to deter possible future Russian aggression elsewhere in Europe, particularly in Baltics. In September 2017, the United States also deployed 2 US Army tank brigades to Poland to further bolster NATO's presence in the region. Since 2019, the efforts of Ukraine to join in NATO has been increased and necessary constitutional arrangements were also made. At the same time, Russia has also been altered its diplomatic and military negotiations to stop such attempts of Ukraine to join in NATO. Eventually, Russia declared war on Ukraine on 24th of February 2022, and still it is going on. Close watchers of the Russia-Ukraine war say the fluid and rapidly changing nature of the conflict makes it hard to gauge what will happen next in Ukraine. For the matter of fact, in the world, with both Moscow's and the West's next moves unpredictable. However, it is widely expected that Russian President Mr. Putin, loathing Ukraine's current pro-Western government and its aspirations to join the EU and NATO, wants to install a pro-Russian regime in Kiev. And there are obviously, when there is a war, certainly we can expect certain odd economic implications. It is no way exemption in the current scenario. Russia's attack on Ukraine has resulted in strong international actions aimed at punishing Russia. But restrictions on Russia also put pressure on other countries too. Clay Lowery, an official at the Institute of International Finance, concluded that we know there are consequences that we cannot predict. The United States and other Western nations have targeted Russia with strong sanctions for a major economy. Some Russian banks have been removed from the SWIFT international payment system. High technological exports to Russia have been limited. As a result, the exchange value of Russians' money, rubles, dropped to a record low. The Institute for International Finance in Washington, D.C. expects the Russian economy to shrink by more than 10% in this year, whereas Oxford economists said, based on the evidence from the earlier wars, the Ukrainian economy could shrink by 50 to 60%. Of course, there are certain impacts on NATO and Europe also, directly or indirectly. The specific challenges and preparedness from NATO and European perspective. With its dependency on energy from Russia, Europe's economy is now at great risk. Natural gas prices increased 20% after the war started, but are 6 times higher than they were at the start of 2021. Russia and Ukraine together supply 13% of world's titanium and 30% of world's palladium. The US continues to commit military assistance to Ukraine following Ukrainian President Zelensky's address to Congress on March 2016. Biden announced an additional $8,000 million in military assistance. NATO defense ministers are drafting plans to reinforce troops on the alliance's eastern flank, bringing a total number of NATO troops and national armies to 180,000. Along the NATO, along with the European Union and other partners, has helped coordinate allies, adoption of unprecedented package of restrictive measures placed on Russia as a result of its brutal and unacceptable actions. These measures include massive and severe sanctions. President Putin's decision to attack Ukraine is a terrible strategic mistake for which Russia will pay a heavy price, both economically and politically, for years to come. This is a general opinion across the world. Of course, there are certain concerns for the other countries of the world other than Russia, Ukraine, NATO, and EU. Countries like many countries like India, Japan, and other developing countries. The current conflict has severely strained US-Russia relations and increased the risk of wider European conflict. Tensions are likely to increase between Russia and neighboring NATO member countries that would likely involve the United States due to alliance security commitments. Additionally, the conflict in Ukraine will have broader ramifications for future cooperation on critical issues like arms control, cyber security, nuclear non-proliferation, energy security, counter-terrorism, and political sanctions in parts of the world, different parts of the world. I don't want to take much of your valuable time. With this brief introduction of the theme of the conference, may I invite Mr. Oleg and Avdiv, Consul General of Russia, Chennai, to address the participants with his inaugural address.